Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Catherine and I'm from the United Kingdom, where I live in a small place called Rochester, which is a beautiful historic town that overlooks the Medway River. My Bigfoot encounter happened in Northern America, in the Northern Peninsula, where I went to stay with my best friend Helena. Helena and I had been inseparable at school, and I decided I liked her when she saw me struggling in a sewing class with a blue and white gingham apron, and she took it from me and finished sewing it. I was so useless at sewing, and the teacher was stunned by my extraordinary progress. Imagine what she thought, from barely being able to stitch anything at all to suddenly making these most perfect stitches and finishing and completing the apron. From that moment on, Helena was my hero. I remember she was the most extraordinary swimmer, and she actually ended up getting a bursary in America to a prestigious university there, which is where I believe she actually eventually met her husband. Growing up, Helena lived on a dairy farm, and we would both go riding our horses over the lush green idyllic valleys together, and sometimes I would watch her father tending to their cows. I remember that dairy as if it was yesterday. I would be watching in fascination as machines pumped the milk from those cows' udders. That milk was the most delicious milk I have ever tasted in my entire life. It was so creamy. Enough of that nostalgia, and back to my story. Many long years passed without ever being in contact with my best friend Helena. I wanted to get in touch with her, but I was so afraid that she had moved on with her life and made new friends and long since forgotten me. I always wondered about her and missed her terribly. And one day through Facebook, I reached out to her, and the rest is history. Helena was so thrilled to hear from me after all those long years, and she begged me to come and stay with her at her home in America for a few weeks. And so that's what I did. This was in the July of 2007. It was wonderful seeing her again, and I was surprised to see how little she had changed, and it felt as if we had never ever been apart. Helena had become a hard-working mother. She was devoted to her one son and her two daughters that were both very busy in school and hectically involved in sports. Like their mother, her children were very outdoorsy and enjoyed everything from whitewater rafting, canoeing, mountain climbing, hiking and swimming. Their beautiful Cape Cod-style house was situated on 55 acres of land. The property was full of rolling green valleys dotted with different varieties of trees, and then on the left-hand side of the valley, there was a high mountainous ridge. This mountainous outcrop led down to another even lower valley, which had a large stream running through it and a grassy embankment, which opened up into a large area of natural woodland. The property was stunningly beautiful and was teeming with abundant wildlife, but my big favourite were the American white-tailed deer. They struck me as being the most gentle, docile creatures. While Helena was dealing with all the demands of her children, those were the times I would either go shopping in a nearby town or exploring her lovely property on my own. I enjoy my own company, so being on my own has never been an issue for me. It was weird that she lived on this land, but never really got to enjoy it because she was such a busy mother running after her family. Chloe had ballet, Russell had karate, and Jonathan had swimming. There were so many extracurricular activities for the kids to do that by the time they came home, it was dinner, TV, and bed. I was so glad to be the one to get to enjoy her beautiful home that in many ways was relatively unexplored by her busy family, who had moved to the property 2 years prior, and even Helena admitted that she had not even explored her own land due to her hectic work schedule. One day I decided to go for a walk in the lower valley so that I could enjoy the lovely stream and explore the forests. Coming from England, I was in awe of this extraordinary amount of space in the American wilderness. It is something we Brits find so extraordinary about your wonderful land. Please don't ever take it for granted. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. I was sitting by the stream that was dotted around with the large, smooth natural boulders that you could sit on like natural sun lounges. It was a glorious sunny day, and the shafts of sunlight warmed my whole body. I could see some white-tailed deer watching me through the line of trees that formed the outer perimeter of the woods. I listened to the sounds of birds tweeting, and I watched dragonflies darting over the clear water, and there were hundreds of monarch butterflies everywhere. It was just breathtaking, and I was transfixed by the beauty. Suddenly I could see a large figure coming down the ridge, which was so sheer I was surprised that anyone could walk down it as effortlessly as this person was. Even though he was a fair distance away, he looked like he worked out a lot because his upper torso looked huge. But the thing that made me take another look at this man was he appeared to have very long arms. I did think that was peculiar at the time, and I could sense that he was looking at me from the ridge. I had no clue who he was or what on earth he was doing on the ridge. However, he was shaking his fists at me as though he was angry. I knew that I was invited here by Helena, so whoever this was, they had no right to disrespect me like that. Soon my attention was diverted from that horrid man on the ridge, and I chose to ignore him, to the most beautiful butterfly I had ever seen in my entire life. It had purple, blue, yellow, and white wings, and it landed on my hand and sat there for a while, and I was delighted. After a while I decided to go exploring the woods, and as I entered, some of the white tails scattered away from me. The woods were beautiful and shaded, and the large top-heavy branches provided a wonderful canopy, keeping the forest cool, which was a refreshing change from the heat of the day. I was surprised to see so many branches had been snapped, because they were branches from healthy trees that looked as if they had been manually broken off by someone who must have been exceedingly strong. There were also parts of the tree where the branch had been removed up to about 8 feet off the ground. That was strange too, I thought. Suddenly everything in the forest became very, very still and eerily quiet. So much so, in fact, that I actually felt very uncomfortable. This quietness was not natural, I thought. Suddenly I could hear this chattering sound, almost as if two people were carrying on a conversation. I was relieved to hear some kind of noise, and I found myself gravitating towards it, but I was not prepared by what I was to see. I saw the backs of two very large bears having a conversation together in gibberish. Bear in mind that we do not have bears here in England, but I knew enough about the creatures to know that they do not talk to each other in this way. I really got the impression that this chattering sound was like a language, because it was like two people talking together very fast, and these creatures were clearly enjoying their conversations, just like two humans would together. These bears were covered in sandy-coloured, thick, short hair, and they were about 7 feet tall and 600 pounds. It suddenly occurred to me that a bear would not be standing on 2 feet all this time like these creatures did. Not once do they get down on their fours like a bear would. I then noticed the long arms, and I caught a glimpse of the human-like hands. In that moment, I realized that these were not bears at all, but I didn't know what they were. I did not have the foggiest idea what these creatures were. And I got a full view of their faces. I was even more confused by them. These creatures, whatever they were, reminded me of humans. They reminded me of a human that was naked but just covered in hair. They were both females because they had hairy breasts. Their heads were cone-shaped, but the details of the face were a little far away to get a close look. Suddenly I found myself getting pins and needles on one of my feet, and so I shook it silently to increase the circulation. And as I did this, I accidentally snapped a tree branch. And when I did this, the sound was very loud. The two creatures stopped talking almost at once, and both their heads turned in my direction. It was like they knew exactly where the noise had come from, and they literally sprinted over to where I was hiding, and I saw these two primate-like faces staring down at me because they were tall, remember. I could see these creatures were surprised and even shocked to see me. I think the last thing they expected to see was a human hiding behind the tree. They both looked at each other and started chattering. I think they were talking about me, and their faces looked very concerned and worried. Suddenly the intensity of their chatter increased, and I got the impression that they were arguing about something, and that something that they were arguing about was me. Then one of the female Bigfoot looked at me with a look of intensity, and she chattered and tried to mime what she was telling me. She brought over a clean wrap from a deer carcass that had been eaten and cleaned up, and she pointed at this carcass. I thought she was actually asking me if I was hungry, so I shook my head. The creature then looked exasperated as she tried to communicate to me. She pointed at the rack again, and then at me, and then towards the outer edge of the forest. Finally, she raised her arms to above her head and then to her sides, as if emphasizing the size of something. Then she started to do a funny kind of act of dragging one of her legs. I got the impression she was miming someone, but who and what I didn't know. She then pointed to me and began acting as if she was chewing something. What on earth was she trying to tell me, I thought. I was equally exasperated by what she was trying to mime. Suddenly both these female Sasquatches seemed to grow alarmed as they sensed something or someone was coming, and they seemed eager to hide me and started pushing me to the undergrowth, and then both females peed around the area where I was hiding. They rarely looked frantic, as I had a good view of them and got the instinct impression that they both wanted to protect me from something or someone, so I guess I decided to trust them, because they seemed very concerned about me in a genuine way, and there was nothing hostile in their manner. Then I heard it. It was the most thunderous roar that I've ever heard in my entire life, and it was exceedingly high-pitched, and it was painful to listen to. I physically felt sick to my stomach from the sound, and I could see the female creatures looking nervously towards the side of the forest that faced the creek and the high ridge where I had seen that large human walking. Now I was beginning to realize that that human with the long arms was probably not human at all, but one of these creatures. I remember it had seen me and appeared to be shaking its fist at me as though it was angry. Maybe the creatures were coming into the forest now, and this was the creature they were protecting me from. By the sound of that roar, he was not a creature to be trifled with. I heard a few guttural grunts reminiscent of someone who was having a hissy fit. I also could hear the sound of his feet as they pressed against the leaves on the forest floor. And the creature also sounded as if he was dragging one of his feet behind him, as if it was injured. Suddenly I heard a huge noise, like something big was walking through the forest, and whatever it was, even those female creatures were afraid of it. I peered through the thicket to see what this thing was, and it was the male creature, and he was twice the size of the females. All I can say was that he was bipedal, scary-looking, and giant-like, with a humped back and rippled with muscles of gargantuan proportion that almost exploded through his upper torso, and shoulders with an exaggerated bubbly definition. He was not sandy-coloured like the other females, but the darkest black that I have ever seen, that made him almost appear demonic. I watched him growling viciously at the two female creatures and pounding his chest. Once again he made that huge guttural growl, and it was too terrible for words. If I never hear that sound again, it will be too soon. One of the females handed the big fella a dead squirrel, and I saw him squat down on his two legs. I noticed one of his feet was very swollen and almost malformed. He proceeded to eat the squirrel like it was a hot dog, and he made these ghastly sounds as he gobbled down the flesh. Then after he ate it, he curled down in a dark corner that was covered in mosses, grasses and twigs, and it was not long before he started to snore very loudly. I have never heard anything snore like that, and I've never seen anything get to sleep that fast either. Imagine a loud human snore for a moment, and increase the volume 10 times over, and you might just get a sense of how this giant creature sounded when he snored. The two females rushed over to my side, and one of them threw me over their shoulders as if I weighed only half an ounce. She darted with me through the forest at such lightning speed and with such stealth. What was even more amazing was that she ran up to Helena's home and dropped me 10 yards from her front door, and then scurried back to the woods. I watched her literally glide over the green grass of Helena's pristine lawn towards the forest. I stood there in silence, hardly daring to believe what had happened. I realized that those creatures had been trying to tell me in their miming language that the big guy would have killed me and eaten me. They knew I was in danger, and they were fearful of what the big guy would do to me. I think he definitely called all the shots and ruled the roost in their family. I got the impression he must have been a real bully. He certainly looked like one. After everything that happened, it took me days to digest, weeks to assimilate, and months to find out what these creatures were. I was to learn that the creatures I saw were cryptids known as Sasquatch. Being from England, Bigfoot is not a subject that is vocalized much, and if you ask the average person what a Sasquatch really is, I doubt they would know. Even though I love Helena with all my heart, and she is still my very best friend in the whole wide world, I never told her my story. Not because she would doubt me, but because of my discomfort in telling it. I am English, reserved, and always a cynic by nature. So what happened to me in America is so out of the ordinary and so seemingly implausible. I just do not believe I will ever speak of my experience to anyone ever again, or anyone. However, your anonymous forum is a different matter altogether, because I can unleash my story, knowing that I can be as elusive as the hairy man himself. Dear Sarah, my name is Angelica, and I'm from Oregon. Some may call that the heart of Bigfoot country. I grew up on a 30-acre plot of land and lived in a very basic, rudimentary cabin with my parents and two of my younger siblings. It was in the early 80s when I had my first Bigfoot encounter. My mother was a stay-at-home housewife who manned the fort while my dad was doing jobs for the Forestry Commission. My mother was born to be a housewife because she loved her life raising us, taking care of the livestock and attending to our every need. As far as she was concerned, family was her world, and she went beyond the call of duty to give us the best lives imaginable, and she succeeded wholeheartedly. In those days, we rarely did live off the land like a proper homestead would. My mother grew us vegetables in the garden, and we would get milk and cream from our dairy cows, eggs from our free-range chickens, honey from our bees, and my father was a great hunter, and so we were well fed with fish from our stocked lake, chickens from our farm, and wild animals that my father killed on our land, which ranged from deer, turkey to rabbits. When my dad was away on a job after some early morning homeschooling at school, my sisters and I would spend our days exploring. My mother always kept her steely eyes on our every movement. The land had been in our family since the early 1800s and was very precious to my father and was something he wanted to keep in our bloodline for generations to come. Sadly, that was not going to happen. I knew no other life than getting up in the morning very early to the early sound of the dawn chorus, and to help my mother with all the household chores, which included feeding the chickens, collecting their eggs, or even hand-milking Matilda, who was my personal favourite cow. Later in the day I'd help my mother bottle preserves, like strawberry jams and pickles, as well as prepare evening meals, which required relentless peeling of potatoes and chopping of vegetables, the usual arduous stuff. One day we had a very unusual visitor come to our home. I do not know what her connection was to our family, but I believe her long-since deceased husband had known my dad when he was a boy. This woman was one of the creepiest people I have ever met in my entire life, and if you had told me she was a witch, I would have 1,000% believed you. I think the thing that freaked me out about her the most were her yellow-brown serpent-like eyes that looked through you almost like a vulture scanning its prey from a great height. I could feel those terrible eyes devouring me with every look, and I just wanted to run and hide. "And so who is this?" said the woman, smiling at me with a toothless grin that set my nerves on edge. Why on earth did she have gums with no teeth? I wondered. Why would you go around just with gums and no teeth? It was so odd. "This is my daughter Angelica," said my mother, smiling and pushing me towards the lady as if half expecting me to give her a hug. The lady reached out to grab me with one of her sinewy, arthritic hands, but I pulled away as fast as I could. I did not want this monstrous woman to touch me. "We have got a troubled little soul here," said the lady, looking at me with a distinct look of disapproval. "Poor little mite, she's got a lot of learning to do." My father came into the room full of beams. "You remember your step-uncle Niles, who died 5 years ago," he said to me. "Well, this is his wife Trudy, and she's going to be joining us for dinner. Isn't that nice?" "Yes," I said. I was surprised to see that this strange, elderly, grey-haired, blue-rinsed lady, with her black, bedraggled, bohemian-style lacy dress that dangled over her ankles in thin petticoat layers, was having no impact on my younger siblings at all, who seemed oblivious to this woman's blatant peculiarities. The woman reached out for her black wallet-like purse, and I kid you not, pulled out a pair of dentures from a smart silver box and set them back in her mouth before she began to eat. Seeing her do this made my stomach cringe, but my mother pretended not to notice her vulgar behaviour. I mean, surely she could have put her dentures on in the bathroom. All I knew was I wanted to get away from the dinner table as fast as I could. I started playing with my roast turkey and mashed potatoes with my knife and fork like a very bored child. "Enough of that, Angelica," my father scolded. "Mind your manners, please, and stop playing with your food like that. It's very annoying." "Is she always like this, so full of nervous energy?" said the woman. "I cannot wait to read her palm. That will tell me a lot about her life purpose. I think you have an interesting one here," she said, speaking with her mouth so full that I could actually see her churning her food like a processor. It was disgusting. I grew cold with disgust. The woman really was a witch, I thought, and I was absolutely terrified of her reading my hand. Supposing she saw me with a crippling, disabling disease, or a terrible sudden accident or disaster in my future. If anything was bad in my future, I would rather not know about it, because knowing for me was far more agonizing than being happily oblivious to what the future had in store for me. I had always been more frightened by what I did not know than by what I could see. My father and mother eagerly presented their palms to the lady. Maybe they did not believe in palm reading anyway, and were just humouring her because she was our guest after all, but they seemed eager to hear what she had to say. The lady looked at my father's hand, and I could see by her dismayed, hesitant expression that something that she was saying was not at all good. "Go on," encouraged my father. "Tell me, even if it's not what I want to hear. Am I going to be eaten by a tiger?" he teased. The woman was silent, and so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop. "What?" said my father. "I'm really going to be eaten by a tiger?" "I would not joke about things like that," said the woman, looking mildly irritated by my father's futile attempts at being humorous. "I am not sure you will like what I'm going to tell you," she said. "Please," my father urged. "I do not know if I believe in this stuff anyway, so just tell me for the hell of it. After all, it's only a bit of fun, isn't it?" The woman bit her thin, cracked lips, and then paused for a long moment. And then she spoke. Your life will be cut short by a sudden disaster. I see your head. Yes, something to do with your head. I feel a thumping headache coming on. You mean like a brain aneurysm? Asked my father in horror. No, said the lady, looking at my father with heartless brown eyes. No, more violent than that. Like someone causing you grievous bodily harm. Is it someone I know? Asked my dad. And how far in the future do you see this happening to me? And is there any way of stopping it? Your lifeline is cut short here, she said, pointing a crooked finger at my father's hand. Your life will come to a violent, sudden end, and it will be soon. And no, it cannot be changed, because it has already been predestined by the choices you made before your incarnation. In other words, you chose your own ending. I saw the look of total horror on my father's gentle face, and his soft blue eyes seemed to cloud over as if he was pushing back tears. I do not believe in all this reincarnation stuff, said my father. I'm a godly man. Good for you, said the lady, looking at my father with an exasperated expression on her face. I'm only telling you what I see, and I have yet to be proved wrong. You see, the hands do not lie. They're a roadmap of our life paths. My mother's face had grown as white as a sheet, and she hastily grabbed the dinner plates from the table and mumbled under her breath, I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure it's not true. My mother seemed less eager to present her hand to the lady, and I saw that it had become clammy and sweaty, as if she was terrified about what she might hear, but for the sake of our guest, putting up a brave front and acting like she did not believe it all anyway. It was only a bit of fun after all. Oh, I see a long life here, said the lady. I see you chose a very easy incarnation for yourself. You clearly are a very young, inexperienced soul. I do see a few health problems along your journey, something to do with your blood pressure, but on the whole, a good long life. But your ticker will finally get the better of you, but not until you're really old. My mother looked relieved and pushed my hand forward. Your turn, Angelica. Let's see what the future has in store for you. My heart started to race at 1,000 miles an hour. I was utterly terrified, and the fear I felt caused me to bolt out of the house like an unbridled, rebellious horse, and I literally galloped out of that cabin at 100 miles an hour. I felt as if I was running for my life and being pursued by a malicious predator, and I just continued to run and run and run. I could see that the horrible woman in my mind turning into a hideous demonic creature with long wings, hunting me down like a massive hawk and revealing to me the things I just didn't want to know. Bear in mind that my family lived on a large plot. We're talking about a vast acreage of rambling natural vegetation and ubiquitous trees that had not been tended to for years, as my father's job for the Forestry Commission meant that he had left our hand to its own natural devices. It had become a wilderness that over the years had attracted some of the healthiest looking wildlife that you have ever seen. We had huge deer on our land, and I even saw giant turkeys that they were so big they could have been on the Guinness Book of Records. Some of our property was so remarkably overgrown that the only paths you could see were made by the deer, and these pathways were narrow and relatively low. So I was surprised to find some new pathways that were 8 feet wide and 10 feet high, and they were all over the place. It was almost as if my father had decided to clear away some of the dense thicket that was full of nasty thorns and barbs, to clear away for better hunting opportunities. But since when had he had time to do such a thing, I wondered. For a moment, curiosity got the better of me, and I began to forget why I was here in the first place. The sheer terror I had experienced in the presence of that vile woman had finally left me. Even if she had seen a short life for my dad, why had she told him something quite so foreboding and so nonsensical? Why had she been so heartless and so insensitive? The thought of losing my father to a sudden disaster brought tears to my eyes, and I was surprised to find that I really was crying. I could taste the saltiness of my tears. I knew I wasn't supposed to wonder about the wild areas of our land without supervision from an adult, because there are a lot of wild animals here that my father had spotted from time to time, like bobcats, cougars, coyotes, mountain lions, and even a black panther. Yes, I knew I was not 100% safe out here in the wilderness part of our land, but being away from that nasty witch brought a sense of peace and serenity to my being. Come what may, that predator would never get to read my palm, and if it meant spending a week in this rambling undergrowth, well then so be it. It was worth my while. I decided to follow a big path that had been made in the dense undergrowth, and one of them led to an open clearing with a beautiful stream. It was like I had found a magical secret spot all of my own, a real treasure to be sure, just like the secret garden. I felt this rush of childlike, whimsical delight and pleasure overwhelm my senses. I tore off my shoes and dangled my feet in the water, enjoying the fresh cold wetness on my skin. I surveyed the beauty of my environment and wondered why I had never seen this part of the valley before, when I had been exploring with my dad. I could see the blue-purple silhouettes of the tall mountains standing proudly against the azure blue sky, dotted with white fluffy clouds. There were large regal-looking eagles with massive wingspans soaring majestically across the sky, and I could hear the sounds of pretty bird calls in the valley, and watched in delight as a mother doe with her fawn came to drink at the stream. I saw her watching me, but she didn't seem overly concerned by me, and continued to drink very thirstily. I did not know how long I spent in this open clearing, overlooking the glorious green hilly valleys. I had long since forgotten about my parents, who were probably wondering where I was by now, but I really didn't care. I had found this secret, enchanting spot in nature. Besides, it felt great to be away from that witch. I lay back on this warm, sunny rock that was a part of a rocky outcrop that surrounded the beautiful, gushing, pebbling stream with its clear, sparkling water and white, pretty, bubbling foam. I cradled my head in my arms and fell into a deep sleep. As I started to awaken, I could hear this excited chattering sound, if two people having a fast conversation in a foreign tongue, and I got the impression that they were talking about me. It sounded like that. I was still in a dreamy state of being half asleep and half awake. I was sure I must be hallucinating or seeing things, because as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I saw two little creatures standing before me. When I say little, I don't mean little in terms of the physical sense, but I mean you could sense they were young, they were juveniles, in age, of about 4 foot tall. But I really had never seen anything like them before. I could sense their young, excitable energy. They were studying me with an open fascination, as if I was something so unusual and so out of place. The one creature reached out with a big, hairy hand and touched my skin, almost as if he was comparing my skin to his own. His expression was one of enthused awe, as if he was marvelling me like you would a great work of art. And by the way he or she was looking at me, I must have been like a Michelangelo masterpiece to them. They both appeared to find me absolutely fascinating, but the feeling was mutual, because I was equally astonished by what I was seeing. I had never seen creatures like this before, and I did not know that creatures like this even existed in North America. And if they did, no one had ever told me about them before. Not my parents, not science books, not anything. I reached out and touched the creature's hairless face and marvelled at how velvety and smooth the skin was. The creature had warm brown eyes that were friendly and inquisitive, had a prominent forehead, a flat nose and thin lips. The only thing I can say about the creatures were that they were definitely primates, but they were also very definitely human. And I think it was that humanness that we identified in each other that made us relatable. Even though I did not understand what the creatures were saying, they would mimic their intentions, and their acting was brilliant. I could almost understand them, even though no words were spoken between us. Suddenly both of the creatures looked in the distance, as if they could sense someone was coming, and then they hid me behind a large tree trunk and made gestures for me to stay quiet. I felt as if they were hiding me for someone they knew would not be pleased to see me. Suddenly I noticed everything in the valley went very still and quiet, and then I heard this heavy sound, rather like a really stocky bull walking through the undergrowth. Standing there, I saw this massive creature, which must have been the creature's mother, because she was 8 feet tall, 800 pounds, and had a pair of dangling breasts that had lost their elasticity due to gravity. The creature was covered with brown cinnamon hair, with red tufts growing through. Her hair was smooth and long, and it shone in the midday sun like a healthy head of hair would. The mother had a very obvious cone-shaped head, which was not as blatantly apparent on her youngsters, and she had virtually no neck, and the hugest shoulders and the smoothest face I've ever seen. Her body was long and lanky, her legs slim and muscular, her arms and chest were enormous, like a first-class athlete that performs in major marathons. The creature was agile, strong, and incredibly muscular. I was glad to be hiding from her, because her sheer size intimidated me, and a one-on-one encounter would have been very frightening for me. She continued to chatter with her kids for quite a time, and in my opinion they were speaking a very clear primate language. Suddenly I could hear the sound of human voices in the valley. "She could be around here," I heard one man say. I could hear my mother crying out in dismay, "Angelica! Angelica! Angelica! Where are you?" I realised that my mother had called out a search party with all the locals, and they were looking for me. I have never seen creatures react as fast to human voices as these creatures did. I watched the juveniles jump onto their mother's back with the agility of a monkey, and they scurried up the foliage of a large tree where they seemed to squirrel themselves to the top of the large canopy and almost become one with the green leaves at the very top of the tree. I do not believe you would have spotted them in plain sight. That was how invisible they became. The mother herself seemed to blend into the scenery, and even though I knew she was hiding, I actually could not see her. It was like she had vanished and disappeared. Suddenly I saw my mother, and she looked so frantic and hot and bothered that I ran out of my hiding space to comfort her. "Oh, Angelica," my mother cried, "why did you run off like that? We've been so awfully worried about you. Something quite dreadful could have happened to you. Have I not warned you about cougars and mountain lions before?" My mother was more happy to see me than she was angry with me. I told her that that witch-like woman had scared me half to death, and she did seem to understand. "We had to be nice to her," said my mother. "She was our guest, you see. But what about all the horrible stuff she said about Daddy? It was so cruel, it was so unkind." "I don't think she intended to be mean, darling. It's just what she claims to have seen in your dad's hands, that's all." "But it's not true, Mummy, is it?" I asked. "I don't want Daddy to die like that," I said. "Of course it's not true," said my mother, taking me into her arms and cradling me. "Is that why you ran away? You didn't want her to look at your hand?" I nodded. "I don't want her saying horrible stuff to me like she did to Daddy." "Of course not," said my mother. "But she's gone now. Do you know what she called you? She said you had an eagle spirit." "What's that?" I asked. "The soul of a truth seeker, someone who wants to find answers to life's many mysteries. Well, that's what she said to us anyway." It was not long after meeting that witch-like woman that her prediction came true about my father. He was in a restaurant one day with some members of the Forestry Commission, including their wives, so my mother was there too. There was a shootout at the restaurant involving the 4 robbers. One woman in the restaurant fainted in terror when the robbers demanded that everybody in the restaurant open their wallets and hand over their jewellery. My father rushed to this lady's aid, and one of the ladies shot both my dad and the lady at point-blank range, and they were killed instantly. After my father's untimely demise, my mother sold our land against the wishes of my father. I think he would have understood, though, why she needed to let go of the place that held so many beautiful memories for her, which were haunting reminders of her dreadful loss. We finally sold up and moved to Boston, where my mother became a head baker for a local cake shop. My mother never married again, but she did develop high blood pressure, but is still going strong at 80 years old. All these years later, I think about my encounters with the 2 young creatures, which I now know to be Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It was only by chance I discovered a program that talked about these creatures as being elusive and impossible to find. I do believe that to be true, because they do know how to blend in with their environment, and I think they do that for survival. I would not mind betting that people have directly looked at a Sasquatch in plain sight and never seen it, even if it was yards away or in touching distance. Nothing would surprise me about those creatures. Well, thank you so much for that lovely story. I really loved it, and I'm sure my listeners did too. The story tonight, I know you're going to love. It's a kind of controversial sort of story because it borders on the supernatural. And all I can say is that there are so many people out there who have actually physically seen a Bigfoot vanish before their eyes like a ghost. And this could be a plausible explanation for why this might happen, if you are a believer in the supernatural. So let's get started. You're going to find this story of interest, I'm sure. My name is Iris, and I live in northern Utah, which is considered one of the most paranormal hotspots in North America. So much has been seen here that truly defies natural explanation, and 1 out of 3 people in this part of the world report having experienced something that borders on the supernatural. I live about 124 miles from Salt Lake City and pretty close to the original Skinwalker Ranch, which I imagine many of your listeners have heard about before. This was a place where the most horrific experiences happened to the original owners, which caused them to vacate the property for 7 long years. Then the place was bought by Terry and Gwen Sherman in 1994, and they moved in with their 2 children and began to experience strange phenomena themselves, like UFOs, wormholes, vortexes, cryptid-like creatures, cattle mutilations, and mysterious orbs of various kinds and sizes, and the list goes on. I gather their stories have turned the heads of some of the world's most hardened skeptics who will never be able to understand the phenomena that occurred at Skinwalker Ranch. My own personal Skinwalker Ranch type story started around the year 2000, when I moved into my very own small ranch of only a few hundred acres, which is minuscule compared to other ranches in this part of the world. I had never believed in the paranormal before, but after moving into my new home, strange phenomena start to happen almost immediately. The hardened skeptic in me refused to believe what I was seeing and hearing until I could deny it no more. My home is situated off one of Utah's dusty roads, and the property has sprawling green pastures and wild thickets of woodland, as well as a beautiful creek set against a high ridge on the northeastern part of the property. It all began when I started renovating my home that was in a state of disrepair, which was one of the reasons I got the land for such a song from the previous residents. Well, that was what I was led to believe at the time, but now I can't say I'm that sure about that. My property was an old Victorian-style home that was built in the year 1810. And while I wanted to preserve some of the beautiful Victorian features of the home, like the mantels and large fireplaces, the glorious staircases and some of the intricate ceiling work, there were other areas of the house where I chose to add my own modern touches that were still keeping with the Victorian style. You're probably wondering where my family was when all this stuff was going on. My husband and children were still living in Portland and were waiting for the renovations to occur and be finalised before they finally moved in. I'm a potter by profession, and so I also needed to build my own pottery studio on the premises as well. I organised workmen to fix up the place, and as soon as they started, they complained of hearing disembodied voices and occasionally being touched by strong unseen hands. They also claimed to have the feeling of being watched all the time. And worse still, some of their tools would go missing, only to be found in the most bizarre places a couple of days later. Then one day, one of my workmen told me something very strange. He said that he had seen a wormhole, or a portal open up over the upper ridge near the creek when he was taking a break, and he said he saw 3 Bigfoot-like creatures coming out of this vortex. He said it looked like these creatures were coming into our reality from another dimension. He had watched them walk up the ridge, and he said they were utterly enormous. I looked at this man like he was completely off his head, and he scuttled away, clearly regretting what he had told me, and I noticed he was exceedingly embarrassed. You see, I do not believe in ghosts, nor in Bigfoot, nor in alternative realities, nor in the supernatural. So anyone suggesting that something was real, if I could not see it, well, as far as I was concerned, they were as nutty as a fruitcake. 2 days later, another workman told me that my property was incredibly weird. At night, he said, I noticed the place is full of these bright, strange orbs, and they come through the forest over there, he said, pointing to the wooded area, near the creek and the surrounding ridge. The other night, I went after one of those round, bright yellow orbs, and it danced around me and disappeared, but it did seem to be intelligent. Some of the orbs are friendly, but the ones that exhibit a blue light appear extremely hostile, because if you get close to them, they make this horrible hissing sound, just like a snake. Last night, I chased after this blue-like orb, and just out of sheer curiosity, because the things are fascinating. Anyway, this blue orb literally touched my ankle, and I watched it disappear into my skin. And after that moment, my ankle inflated and blew up like a balloon, and I was in agony for 2 long hours. He proceeded to tear down his sock, and I was horrified to see this massive bright blue bruising all over this man's ankle area, and it shimmered in a fluorescent light that was not of this world. I have never in my life seen a blue colour like that before, because it does not exist in our natural world, and the only way that I can describe it is that it does appear to have an aquamarine-like tinge to it. Then my workman continued, During the day when we are working, we all hear strange whispers in our ears, and this invisible touching is on the increase. You literally feel human-like fingers touching you, which is very disturbing and sends chills down your spine. When this touching happens, the whole area on your body becomes freezing cold, and the temperature on a summer's day becomes freezing. You literally can feel where the cold spot begins and ends, almost like the freezing spot is encased in a moving cloud of some kind that is invisible to the naked eye. Also, something is definitely watching us when we eat our lunch out there by the creek. And whatever it is, ma'am, it is not good. It kind of feels out of worldly and very, very strange. All the stuff I was being told sounded so far-fetched and way too unbelievable for me. It was impossible for me to make sense of it. But one night when I was sleeping in my newly renovated bedroom, I saw the largest face staring at me through the window, with a very menacing look and large red eyes that literally glared at me. Bear in mind, my bedroom window was 8 feet off the ground, and so whatever it was that was staring at me through the window had to be exceedingly tall. I am not driven to anxiety of any kind, but I do not mind admitting that this thing had got me feeling suddenly very insecure and uncertain about things. Surely it was these workers planting weird ideas into my head, and my imagination was in overdrive, manifesting the fruits of those fears. Now I was almost certain that I had imagined this creature and made it up in my mind. Maybe that was my way of dealing with something that I just could not make any sense of. One day I decided to eat my lunch by the creek, and that was when I began to feel that something was watching me through the trees from the wooded area on my land. Everything suddenly went so very quiet and eerily still in the whole valley, and you could have heard a pin drop. All the natural bird song had all but vanished, and even the still breeze seems to have subsided. Suddenly I had the ominous feeling of impending doom. I do not know how else to describe it to you, but I'm not given to any kind of fanciful thought. But I know what I felt. My whole body went as cold as ice, even though it was an exceedingly warm day, and I started to shiver and shake. Suddenly I heard this loud whizzing sound that sounded like an egg beater on full throttle, but much louder and much faster. It literally caused the whole valley to shake under its intense vibration of this extraordinary sound. I looked up towards the ridge, and coming through the sky was a spinning wheel-like tunnel that opened up over the valley. I could tell the sound was coming from this thing, and it got louder and louder and louder and much more intense. Suddenly the mouth of this tunnel opened so wide, almost like an enormous lift, and I swear, and I kid you not, I could see grass, sunshine, and blue sky coming from inside this open vortex, as if it was another reality that was suddenly merging into ours. It truly reminded me of a lift when you press the button and open it up onto different floors. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. This could not be happening to me. Remember, I'm the world's biggest cynic, and this kind of stuff does not happen to me. I watched in horror as 3 Bigfoot-like creatures merged from this vortex, and I knew without a doubt that they were Sasquatch. I have never felt such palpable fear in my entire life as I did when I saw these creatures moving out of the vortex into the woods. The alpha male, at the least, that is what I assume he was, looked as if he was 10 foot tall and 1,200 pounds. They all had long muscular arms that were so long that I am almost sure they could have touched their ankles while standing straight. As they moved, they steered their arms backwards and forwards, almost as if they were marching, and they literally glided on long, slender, muscular legs over the ground with a fluidity and seamlessness I have yet to see in another animal. I did not get a close view of their faces, but their humanoid bipedal beings definitely had bullet-shaped heads that literally merged into the shoulders without needing an obvious neck. All this happened so very quickly that I almost began to doubt what I had seen. I doubted it so much, in fact, that I even wondered if there was a plant on my land that had hallucinatory spores that was making me see these crazy things, as well as my workers. The next day, after having been disturbed by what I had seen the previous day, I decided to venture in the forest to see if I could see any physical signs of these Bigfoot-type beings that I'd seen coming out of this strange wormhole or vortex. As I ventured into the woods, it felt cheerful and serene. I saw squirrels dashing up the branches of several large tree trunks, and a couple of ground grouse, and even a few white rabbits hopping around here and there. It was so beautiful in the woods, and so peaceful, and there were open spaces everywhere, almost as if the previous owner of the property had cleared out a lot of the rambling thicket and underground debris, so that the woods were spacious and airy, with lovely shafts of sunlight twinkling and dancing through the trees. I noticed that many of the trees were exceedingly old and had been left untouched for many years. Some of those trunks were absolutely enormous. I also saw strange tree breaks in various parts of the woods that must have been done by something large. There was no way a human could snap such a weighty tree branch like that, I thought. It was a while before I came across an exceedingly old, rusty trailer that someone had lived in a long time ago. It had once been a red colour, but had rusted all over and appeared to be very, very, very old. I looked inside the trailer and the whole floor was covered in nesting material, and it smelt rank. The smell was sulphurous and a little like rotting egg, and that's the only way I know how to describe it. Suddenly everything went very, very quiet, when only moments before the forest was alive with animal activity and sounds. It was then that I heard the sound of something very heavy galloping through the woods like a horse, but the sounds of those feet were thunderous and intimidating. I knew this thing, whatever it was coming towards me. My heart started to race through my chest and I began to panic, but it was too late because this thing was standing yards away from me and it appeared not to be happy to see me. It was the alpha Bigfoot that I'd seen coming through the portal the previous day. At close quarters, this thing has got to be the most terrifying creature that I have ever seen in my entire life. I have been up close and personal to a tiger in Thailand before. I have stroked a tame lion in Africa. But this creature, whatever it was so scary. And those other creatures from other parts of the world appeared like pussycats compared to this thing. The creature had the scariest eyes that I have ever seen. They were hostile and angry, and I got the distinct impression that this Bigfoot wanted to kill me. I could have been wrong, of course, but that was the impression I got. I saw the mouth curling back to reveal the largest human-like teeth that I have ever seen, and then this creature let out the most thunderous roar that was so terrifying it literally went through my whole body and appeared to be physically incapacitating and disorientating over me. Then I remember just blanking out as if I'd been anaesthetized in a long surgery, and I started to wake up very slowly. I found myself waking up in the valley, on the grass, near the ridge and the creek, and something enormous was licking my face with its long wet tongue like a dog. But it was not a dog. This thing was like a huge wolf-like creature that was nothing like I have ever seen before. It stood at 4 feet high off the ground and was easily as wide. It had the wolf-like head of a wolf and the body of a wolf. But the only thing different about it was that its coat was woolly like that of a sheep. The creature was not aggressive by any means, but the look of him terrified me, and I started to run from him towards the house, and I could hear it panting behind me, and I could hear its heavy feet following me. "Oh, please, God, just go away," I cried in my heart. "Just go, please go." Suddenly the sound stopped, and I saw the creature stand very still, and he watched me with his large, curious, seemingly friendly eyes. And then I kid you not, and I don't know how to explain this without sounding completely mad, but this creature vanished before me like a ghost. I returned back home to find one of the workers in a dreadful state. He said that he had seen this very strange creature on our property that had the body of a horse and the face of a man. And this thing had scared him half to death because he had never seen anything like this before. And it also had eyes that were very menacing because they glowed red. It was like it was saying to me, "Yes, I'm real, and deal with it." Ma'am, I know you're not going to believe me, but as God is my witness, this weird creature is really what I saw. And if you look at the ground, you can actually see the hoof marks of this thing. I followed the workmen to the muddy spot on our land, and there were distinct marks of an animal hoofs. And remember, I didn't have any horses on my land at the time. I looked at the workman who was called Paul, and I told him that I believed him. "Strange things have indeed been happening to me too," I told him, "and I really do not want any of you workers to leave, because I would be terribly afraid if I was left all on my own here." It was comforting for me to know that the workers were staying on my land in a small cottage on the property. "Look, ma'am, do you really want to continue with this project? I know if it was me, I would sell and get the hell out of this place. This place is super crazy, and as for your house, It is very definitely haunted. When we are working, we keep hearing these strange voices, the whispering sounds, the banging of pots and pans everywhere, and we have also been physically touched by unseen hands. I am going to stay, I told Paul. These things, whatever they are not going to drive me from my home. I have got to fight this thing, whatever it is. The following day I did my research, and I contacted a well-known psychic that for the purposes of remaining anonymous, I will call her Deborah. Deborah was unlike any person I have ever met in my life. She was in her early 30s with dark brown hair, fair skin, and sparkling, friendly brown eyes. And she wore a bright pink turban on her head, fastened with a gold pin, and a long flowing purple dress that almost looked like a satin nightgown. You do realize that your property dips into the middle of the valley, creating the most perfect portal between our realm and other reality, she told me. It is an extraordinary place you have got here. I proceeded to tell Deborah all about the strange happenings on our land, all about the strange creatures I had encountered and seen, all about the cryptid beings, and of course the wormholes and vortexes. I also told her about my encounter with the Bigfoot, and waking up to find this strange wolf-like creature licking my face. Deborah sat down in my living room, and she lit a candle while holding my hands. She listened to me, and I know that she did not seem to find anything I told her strange or peculiar. Close your eyes, she said. I want to call this Bigfoot forward and see what he wants. I humoured Deborah because I was highly doubting that she could connect with this physical creature. But then suddenly my living room was filled with that sulphurous, nasty egg-like stench that I had smelt in the rusting trailer the day before. He's here, she said, and my word, he's enormous. And he's terrifying to look at. He has that predatory, dangerous look to him. But I sense that he has a very gentle soul. What does he want? I asked. He wants to be left alone. He wants you to leave the woods to his charge, because he is displeased with your kind causing so much physical damage to the forests in your world. But the woods, he say, belong to him. But they belong to me, I explained. He says that the woods have always belonged to him and to his kind for thousands of years, and that it has always been that way. He is angered by the lack of respect he receives from people like you. Well, I said, as long as your kind do not bother me, you can have the woods as far as I am concerned. I do not need them. I bought this ranch for my pottery studio, not to raise cattle nor horses. He says that is why you were chosen to buy this specific plot of land, because he knows you will respect it. He says it is a very special place. It is a vortex opening. What does that mean? I'm not sure, said Deborah. I think he says it's a doorway to other realms that open and close at certain times of the day. Are they going to harm me and my family? I asked. He is offended, said Deborah, that you would think so little of him. I was told by Deborah that the Bigfoot had sent me out of the woods once I had fainted from the shock of my encounter with him. He had asked the wolf-like creature to watch over me as I lay recovering from my shock. He knew that humans were comforted by dog-like creatures, so that was why he sent the creature to you as a source of familiarity and comfort. He apologizes for appearing to terrify you. He realizes that he's a big, imposing creature and can be intimidating, but he does say that he means you no harm. I also learnt from Deborah's psychic revelations that the horse-like creatures with the human faces were sent to watch over the land and observe changes, because it is an area where a portal needs to be protected. As for the ghostly activity in my home, it was apparently caused by the renovations that had disturbed an owner that had lived on the land and in the house during the Victorian era. He was upset about the modernization of the property. "His name is Mark Cotton," said Deborah, "and he used to live on this land. I have asked him to leave you well alone, and he has agreed. He would like you to replace his headstone that has been dislodged under the oak tree to the left-hand side of your property. So that is my story. I did indeed find the gravestone of Mark Cotton that had been buried beneath layers of soil and had fallen flat on the ground. I decided to purchase him a brand new gravestone because the original one was very damaged and you could barely see his name on the stone because it had weathered away so much from age. I put his name on a new stone with the words, 'Rest in peace, precious, beautiful soul' underneath it. I conducted a tiny service with a priest and a couple of workmen for Mark Cotton regularly, so that with a couple of workmen for Mark Cotton. On my land, I regularly put flowers on the plot to let him know that he will never ever be forgotten." The activity on my property died down almost immediately, and the workers were no longer being bothered by paranormal experiences. As for the Bigfoots in our forest, I have respected their territory, and I never go in there, although from time to time I do hear woodknocks, whistlings, whooping sounds, and as well as other animal calls. The house was renovated, and I did indeed get my beautiful pottery studio, where I have produced some of the most outstanding work, better than I imagined possible, which I have been selling for large sums of money. I was always a good potter, but nowadays I am producing seriously phenomenal stuff, and I believe it has something to do with the portal in this place. My family moved into this property, and from time to time they comment on all the bright orbs that have been seen dancing over our land in circles of bright light and in various sizes, but we have almost become used to these nightly oddities. From time to time we have seen the wormhole and the vortex opening up over the valley, and this has been witnessed by all the members of my family, and I know it is not my imagination. I do not expect your listeners to believe a word of what I have told you. I know in their shoes I would not believe a word of it either. I understand cynics because I am one myself. However, after all my experiences, since I bought this place, my perception of reality has definitely shifted. I now know with certainty that there are different dimensions out there. There are other realities. And from what I have seen, this Bigfoot creature knows how to access those mystical coordinates. Bigfoot may not know how to access a computer. He may not know how to operate Facebook, but I think he has a greater understanding of our physical reality than we do. He may wonder how we access this invisible web of communication all over our globe, but I wonder how he accesses those wormholes and vortexes into other realities. So there you are. That's my story. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. I just want to apologize for sometimes mispronouncing things, but I really do hope you enjoyed it. I know that I did, and it certainly offers an alternative opinion of Bigfoot encounters. Dear Sarah, my name is Jenna, and I grew up in the early 60s. I always remember the Yeti being a part of my life growing up. I never considered them different or unusual as a creature. I just always knew that they were real. I did not see them a lot growing up because they were naturally elusive by nature, but my father used to call them the foresters, and I knew he had a great respect for these marvellous ambassadors of the woods. One thing they did remarkably well was to cull the ever-increasing production of wild hog on our land, which used to do a lot of damage in our woods, so I knew my dad was very grateful for that. Because hogs themselves are not easy to take down and can be remarkably aggressive. I remember the first time I saw one of the foresters. I think I must have been 16 years old. I remember watching a forester swinging from one tree to another like a monkey, using his long arms to effortlessly maneuver his body like a superb gymnast. The tawny browny-haired humanoid bipedal creature was about 6 foot and 500 pounds, and his agility was tremendous. Truly, this thing took gymnastics to a whole new level, and I could not understand why such a hefty creature could appear so weightless on branches that may well have been lighter than he was. How did he manage not to break them? How on earth did he avoid doing that? It was almost like he redistributed his weight so that it did not put too much strain on the branches. I remember clapping at the time, and then he mimicked my clapping back to me and continued to perform some clever acrobatics on the tree. I could tell he enjoyed my response to his performance, and by the looks of him, I think he enjoyed showing off. I got up and walked to a nearby tree and tried to imitate the creature. I was surprised that he hadn't run off into the woods, but continued to observe me trying to perform my chaotic stunts that made me look hideously clumsy. I even did a handstand on the grass with a couple of cartwheels, but the creature was not remotely impressed by that. He looked at me sorrowfully, turning his head to one side and chatting pitifully as if he thought my performance was utterly dreadful, and of course it was. Next to him I was like a sack of huge potatoes that had no natural rhythm, no coordination, and absolutely no agility. Another time as a young girl I was swimming at the creek with my brother Adam, and we were splashing around in the water with absolute delight, and suddenly we saw two female foresters watching us, and they appeared to find our swimming very amusing. Even though they were on dry land, they started to mimic our behaviour in the water with the movements of their arms. I really got the impression that they enjoyed watching us. It was almost like they were watching a movie that was hilariously funny, because they chatted excitedly in gibberish, backwards and forwards while they continued to watch us. My father said that the foresters loved children, especially the females, who were very protective over their young, and I always got the impression that they liked us, and that if we ever got into trouble of any kind, that they would always help us. I just knew that for a fact. There were times when a few of our fat chickens were pilferaged, as well as fruit from our orchards and vegetables from our garden. My father always knew that it was the foresters, and he didn't mind at all sharing any of our produce with them. In fact, my mother was an amazing traditional southern cook, and whenever she made an excess of anything, she would leave it out for the foresters in a basket at the edge of the woods. They always returned that basket. It was normal during the day to hear whistling in the woods, and even chattering sounds of the creatures talking. They never attempted to hush their voices around us. Even when we never saw them, we always heard them at night, and we would sometimes hear wood knocks, owl calls, and my father would tell me that the foresters were getting ready to hunt, and they were communicating with each other during the hunt and working together as a team to take down a deer. Every year at Thanksgiving and Christmas, my father would place a bright fairy light on the trees, and we would sing Christmas carols like the first Noel and Once in Royal David's City. I promise you we could see red eyes shine at 7 feet off the ground as the creatures gathered together in a group and watched us singing. Sometimes I wondered if we were singing for them because they were our only audience. At night, if you saw a forester in the woods, it would almost look ghost-like and menacing because of their unfortunate large dark forms. They would look like a mass of black with long spidery arms and red eyeshine, which could make them look a bit demonic and scary. Also, the way the foresters moved was so seamless and fluid, you could be forgiven for believing they were floating above the ground, which obviously they weren't. So I really believe if I had not known any better, I might have thought the portals of hell had indeed opened. During the day we rarely saw the creatures, but if I did, it would be in passing and would happen so fast because they would move like the wind. You would get a flash of a dark humanoid creature darting across your field of peripheral vision. It would happen so often that I knew it was not my imagination, so seeing them up close and personal was rare. I really believe we only ever saw them out of random chance, or because they chose to reveal themselves to us. I knew when Thanksgiving came they sensed it was a special time of the year for us, and I could tell they loved the bright lights on our outside trees, because they did take down some of our Christmas lights and tried to put them up on top of a tree in the canopy in the woods. But without electricity, they invariably did not work. Of course, they never understood why. My father would go out into the woods to shoot a turkey for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and he had his eyes on this humongous turkey that he never managed to take down, and I know it frustrated him. Every year this massive turkey managed to evade my father's trigger. It was almost like he was teasing him. He became more and more determined to get this thing, but invariably always failed. He came to the conclusion that he was outsmarted by this feathery teaser. Imagine his surprise when he found the ginormous turkey, perfectly plucked, with several large trout, presented to him on a deerskin outside our cabin door. He knew it was from the foresters. Had they known about his longing to take down this bird? Somehow he thought they did, and he was very thrilled to get it. I would not say they gifted us often, but sometimes, usually once or twice a year, we would find an offering at our front door, like a large wild hog or a 700-pound deer. My father would marvel at their ability to take down something so huge, but the foresters were brilliant hunters, and being easily over 700 pounds and 6 foot tall on average, their sheer strength and agility made hunting very easy for them. During the winter time, the foresters were even more elusive than usual, but I always knew they were around, because when you went into the woods, you always felt like you were being watched. My father would call it the invisible coat, which he said they wore when they did not want to be seen. As a youngster, I thought that, like Joseph in the Bible, who had a coat of many colours, that these creatures had special coats that they wore to make themselves invisible. It occurred to me that such a coat would be very useful when it came to exams at school, because I would creep off with the coat to find the answers to all the questions. I would always have asked my dad why the foresters were so evasive and elusive, and he said that the foresters were gentle, reserved, and sometimes reclusive creatures that liked their own space and privacy, just like some people do. My father understood that better than anyone, because he was a gentle soul that barely strung 2 words together. I always wondered why he had married my mother, who was so outgoing and bubbly, but then they do say that opposites attract, and my parents have always adored each other. Maybe my father liked to listen, while my mother just yapped away. Sometimes in winter I would notice several igloo-like structures in the woods, and I knew the foresters stayed in these structures if it was extremely cold, and only if it was cold. They would always smell a little nasty if you walked inside one of these things, like the smell you get from a sweaty pair of sneakers. In the summers they would make these big teepee structures in the woods, with 700-pound logs strewn over each other, that were so big on the inside, and they would line these structures with bracken, branches, leaves, mosses and grasses to make soft mattresses to lie on. They would always hide the deer they had killed under piles of leaves, and when they finished eating their kills, they would keep all the bones in a large nest at the far end of the forest, which I imagine was their own personal dumpster. I never had any real interaction with the foresters because I learnt to respect them and their boundaries. I never knew that the foresters were an unknown creature until many years back, when I learnt the creatures were known as Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I realised then how privileged I was to grow up with these things in my own backyard. Yet despite living next to them for so long, I never really learnt as much about them as I would have liked to, because they are so secretive, and they do remain in hiding, and they do it superbly. Some people suggest that they have interdimensional abilities, but I know nothing about that, and I suppose anything's possible. I never ever came across an aggressive forester, but maybe if we had treated them very differently, with disrespect, they could have been angry, because like people, you do get different types of foresters. So there you are. That's my story. Well, I just want to say I loved that story, and I know my listeners would have loved it, so thank you very, very much for it. You are so going to love tonight's story. I am crazy about this story. This story blows my mind. If it doesn't blow your mind, I'll eat my hat. I really will. It is a phenomenal story. I'm so excited. I can't wait to share it with you. Can you believe it? But this DJ sees a sight in the woods that you would never imagine possible. And I think he is one of the most privileged people on this planet. That's all I can say. He was so lucky. You don't get luckier than this. And the experience he had with this creature was just incredible. It was just something that I wouldn't have been surprised if he never shared it with anyone, because it was something that was so magical. It was like a secret you'd only keep to yourself, but I'm so grateful that he's sharing it tonight. You're going to love the story. So before we get started, I just want to thank all my listeners around the world for their continued support, especially my subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, because believe me, this isn't the only story that is going to knock your socks off, so you want to be tuning in. Let's get started. Dear Sarah, I've been a DJ for over 20 long years, running my own mobile disco business here in North America, which normally I would promote because I am an entrepreneur at heart. But in this case, I would like all my details to remain exclusively anonymous. This is to protect my business and personal reputation, of course, because there are people out there who would think you were barking mad to believe in the hairy man known as Bigfoot. On the subject of cryptozoology, it was not something that really tweaked my interest at all. And as for Bigfoot, I truly just thought he was a creature depicted in ancient legends and myths, but not something alive today roaming the forests of North America. I was to discover how wrong I was when I had my Bigfoot encounter, which was such a profound experience and one of the most awesome wonders of my life, that even today the memory of the event warms the very cockles of my heart and brings a huge smile to my face. My story begins when I was contacted by a young woman who wanted to have her 25th birthday at her family home in the great outdoors under the stars with plenty of dancing music. The usual procedure is for my clients to visit me at the premises to discuss the music that they will require for a function. I knew I would also need to set up a generator and various speakers and uplighters around the area in question to create the beautiful ambience that is always needed at a party. The girl, who I will call Sophie, came to discuss everything about the party with me and presented me with a list of songs that she liked. I did tell her the importance of reading the crowd at a party for a DJ, because that enables you to ensure that you get people dancing on that floor. It really does require skill, passion, and lots of experience to create the right vibe at a party. After all, it is the music and dancing that ultimately determines how successful the party will be. I have had clients in the past bringing me lists of songs they wanted me to play at a party that had no impact on their guests whatsoever. If I had not finally got permission from the host to forget the uniform list and regenerate the dance floor using my natural skills, those functions would have been a disaster and people would have left early. In my experience, even the background music is so important when the guests arrive at a function, because it has a way of enabling strangers at a party to mingle together much more easily and feeling more comfortable. It really does break the ice, set the mood, and create a relaxing ambience, so significant to the success of a party. So my story begins in the July of 2012, when I was driving my white van down a long dirt road that was surrounded on either side with ubiquitous trees of similar size and height that stretched back for miles into vast areas of natural forest. I took a turning to the right and opened an old cattle gate, and then drove down this long driveway that was surrounded by short brush, rambling vegetation, and different species of trees dotted liberally all over the property. I finally parked outside a very quaint-looking whitewashed farmhouse that looked like it had been restored and renovated to its original condition. Sophie came running out of the house in a pair of blue jeans and t-shirt, followed by two excitable black Labradors who were wagging their tails profusely. "I'm so excited," she told me. "I appreciate you coming to set up early. I'm expecting 72 guests tonight, and I'm so excited. I just can't wait. Follow me and I'll show you where I want you to set up all your equipment." I followed Sophie and I found myself in an open clearing overlooking a beautiful creek. On the northern side of the property, behind the creek, there were long stretches of beautiful hilly valleys that were visually quite breathtaking, set against a perfect azure blue sky. It was on the east side of the creek where she wanted me to set up my equipment, and this was literally only a few yards away from a large wooded area that looked like it stretched back forever. There was already a couple of vans parked on the clearing, as Sophie had hired everything, from tables to chairs to caterers to flowers and decor. She showed me where she wanted me to place my uplighters, and she wanted them to be aquamarine in colour, which was my favourite colour as well. I was surprised that she made no alternative plans in case it should rain, but she told me that she knew it wouldn't rain, and that impressed me tremendously because she had more of a positive attitude than most of my clients do about possibility of rain. Fast forward to the party, which was a huge success, and as Sophie had predicted, there was no rain. The decor was all aquamarine, and there were blue and white balloons everywhere. The guests literally danced until 3 a.m, until finally everyone had left. The food had been wonderful and extremely delicious. There had been a massive barbecue with burgers, chicken wings, hot dogs and steaks, followed by lovely selections of puddings, including a large ice cream, blue dolphin birthday cake, which everybody tucked into and enjoyed. There had also been a mobile bar offering all manner of alcoholic beverages, and by the looks of things, Sophie had spared no expense. And there were some people vomiting in the bushes because they had overdone it with the alcohol. But on the whole, it had been a flawless, seamless occasion. As is often the case, everyone had left before I did. And I drove my van to the clearing in order to retrieve all my equipment because it is very expensive and I cannot afford to lose it or leave it lying around or have it stolen. So I packed my van, rolled up my extension leads, piled my equipment into the van and slammed the doors behind it, feeling satisfied that everything was finally packed away. I was feeling utterly famished, which is a natural phenomenon for DJs after a party, which is why so many night workers are overweight. Luckily, I'm not one of them. There are lots of cold cuts and salads lying around, so I crossed my legs and sat on a grassy verge, eating some leftover food hungrily. It was such a beautiful starry night, with a bright full moon which made it really quite light. It was about 4:15 in the morning when I suddenly heard a low moaning sound coming from the woods, and I immediately realised that someone was in trouble. I thought that maybe a guest at the party had wandered into the wood on their own and had probably fallen over a log or something, and maybe they had sprained or even broken an ankle. Worse still, a drunk guest could have ended up passing out in the woods after wandering around in a drunken stupor, and maybe they had fallen and now needed some serious help. I threw down my plate of food, retrieved my flashlight from the van, and rushed hastily into the woods without even considering my own safety for a moment. I just wanted to help this poor person who was stuck in the woods, because I know I would want somebody to help me in the same situation. It must be awful for them being in the middle of the woods, all on their own. They should be terrified, I imagined. My flashlight caught a glimpse of the figure that appeared to be seated on the ground, hunched over and moaning in pain. "Are you all right?" I asked, bending down towards the person with my flashlight, lighting up the whole area. I then took several startled steps backwards as I eyed the large figure sitting on the ground with their legs wide open. This was not a human, I thought in horror, but what on earth was it? The face looked up at me with desperate agony in their eyes, as if they were in physical pain. I studied the creature closely, who was clutching her stomach, which was extremely extended and shaped like she was very pregnant. I suddenly realized that this creature was in the process of giving birth, and clearly this was not an easy one. I did not know what to do, because even sitting on the ground, the creature was enormous and exceedingly intimidating. She was covered in fine dark hair, which I could not see clearly, but I did notice the large padded grey feet and the very long arms that were much bigger than human arms are. Also, her torso was exceedingly big, about 3 feet in width and dense with muscle. The face was cone-shaped and the nose was flat, but it was those pleading eyes that got my attention. I really got the impression the creature wanted me to stay, because when I tried to turn away, she made a desperate chattering sound and even indicated with her arms that she did not want me to go. She even patted the ground with her hands, as if to say, "Please come and sit over here." I could hardly believe it. I had two thoughts rushing through my mind. One was to run away as fast as I could, and another more compassionate thought that overcame my first very sensible one, and this was the nagging desire to help this creature and overcome my fear of her, because her large presence was very intimidating. However, in her pre-birth state, she was in no condition to launch a predatory attack on me, and it was that revelation that convinced me to stay and help the strange ape-like humanoid. In my experience, most animals give birth much more easily than humans, but this creature was experiencing very real pain and was clearly having a difficult birth. However, despite her moans, they were not the high-pitched screams human women often have during natural childbirth. This creature was a lot quieter. She would keep touching her crotch area and bending down to examine it closely. I think she was looking for the first sign of the baby's head. I could see the creature was restless as she kept shifting positions all the time while she moaned. I bent down on my knees, keeping a small distance between myself and the creature, and I tried to encourage her. "You can do it. Yes, you can do it. I know you can do it. Yes, just push. Yes, push. Yes, push. Just push. Just push. Yes, good girl. Good girl. You can do it. You can do it. Yes, you can do it. Get another push. Just another push." I kept talking to her softly like that, and she looked up at me with a look of such tenderness and appreciation that in that moment my fear completely dissipated, and I knew at once that she would never, ever hurt me. I really knew that she was thankful that I was there. I do not know how I knew this, because I am not naturally intuitive by nature, but on this occasion I truly felt her thankfulness, and it was tangible and also expressed in her eyes. Suddenly this head came rushing out of her crotch area, and the creature gathered this damp, grey, almost hairless form into her large arms and started to lick the baby with her tongue and seemingly kiss it almost like a human would. The creature whimpered in pleasure and delight, and she looked utterly enchanted and thrilled. Her eyes were filled with joy, and she had the happiest expression I have ever seen in my life on her face. I do believe she was smiling. I immediately started to clap and to congratulate her with my words. Why I did this I do not know, but she seemed to know what I was saying. She lifted up the grey little form in the air so that it faced me, and I think she was showing off her baby to me proudly. "Look what I delivered," she was saying. I noticed the creature's eyes were large for the face, and it was moving them, and it seemed much more aware than a human baby would be directly after birth. It seemed much more engaged. It had not even cried once after delivery, but it was very much alive and was wiggling its little arms and feet. The creature placed the baby on one of her hairy, full breasts, and the baby started to suckle almost immediately, making a smacking sound with its lips. It was the cutest thing I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm a man, and so that's saying something. I was awestruck by the experience, and I could see the maternal instincts of this mother in overdrive. The creature was a very gentle and naturally caring mother, and she herself, as an individual, was incredibly likable. I really warmed to her personality like I would to any human being that made a positive impression on me, like she did. I remember thinking the creature must be hungry after her delivery, and because she was so human, I decided to go and get her some leftover food from the party, which I placed on a tablecloth on her side. I watched her instinctively grab a bunch of sweet grapes, which she ate happily, sucking out the juices from the skins eagerly. I then nodded and raised my hand, indicating to her that I was going to leave, and then it was the creature's turn to clap. She clapped as though she understood. And then I left the scene and drove back to my home, humming happily to myself, because this truly had been one of the most magical, memorable moments of my entire life, and I didn't believe I would ever share it with anyone. Watching this creature give birth was utterly extraordinary and empowering. I felt privileged at the fact that she had wanted me to be there, even though I was a human. And for me, that was such a privilege and was so incredible. How many people would have dreamed to have been in my position of such privilege? When I got home, I wasted no time in doing research and discovered that I'd encountered a real live Bigfoot, which is a creature that is naturally elusive and keeps its distance from humans, preferring not to be seen by them. I began to realize that I had indeed been privileged to have a one-on-one encounter with this Bigfoot, who had invited me into her world ever so briefly. I understood very quickly that no one was likely to believe my outrageous story that would seem very improbable for most cynical people. On a softer note, I would like to say that I truly understand where they're coming from. I also learned how people were ridiculed and patronized for claiming to believe in Bigfoot, and it was not long ago that I would have joined forces with those unbelievers until, of course, my reality was shattered by the revelation that this creature is indeed as real as you and I. So there you are, that is my story. My wife is the only person in the whole wide world that knows my secret, but now you do too. But she encouraged me to unleash my account to your anonymous forum, because she said there are people out there who would just love to hear my story and would not be dismissive of it, nor would they be a disbeliever. So that is why I'm sharing my story tonight. I just want to say, and I know my listeners as well are going to be blown away by this story. I am so jealous of you. I cannot imagine what a privilege it was to see a Bigfoot giving birth. That is one hell of a story. And if you don't subscribe after this story, I'm going to be shocked. I'm only joking. But anyway, love to all of you. Until next time.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.